Hi, this is Lawrence Fleckenbill. You are listening to TV Confidential.
And I didn't mean to be so glum or morbid.
That's all right, Bob.
Really, because it is a problem. For instance, I brought up a subject one day on the show here, Ron, about fallout shelters. Now, taking it for instance, you build a fallout shelter for you and your wife. It only holds two.
We got 2 children. That makes it a little bit...
All right, let's suppose that. Here's Rod Serling with his wife and 2 children. You have built a fallout shelter that only holds 4. Comes an attack. There's a knock on the door. It's Bridget Bardot. Now, the question is, how long will it take you to get your wife and kids out of the shelter?
Ed Robertson welcoming you back to TV Confidential, radio talk show about television that will play part 2 of a conversation that began last week with Anne Serling and Jodi Serling, the daughters of Rod Serling and Marc Scott Zicree, author of the Twilight Zone Companion. Anne Serling, also the author of As I Knew Him, My Dad, Rod Serling. We're celebrating the 65th anniversary of the premiere of The Twilight Zone on CBS television, as well as the 100th anniversary of the birth of Rod Serling. Rod Serling's centennial birthday was this past December 25th. The Twilight Zone Companion is not only one of the best television reference books ever written, it is also one of the most influential, having influenced a whole generation of TV series creators and filmmakers, including J.J. Abrams and Vince Gilligan, while As I Knew Him, My Dad, Rod Serling, offers readers an intimate look at Rod Serling as a father and as a visionary, blending both personal memories with rare family photographs and letters. Both As I Knew Him, My Dad, Rod Serling, and The Twilight Zone Companion, available wherever books are sold, as well as Amazon.com. We'll talk some more about the legacy of Rod Serling, as well as some of the episodes of The Twilight Zone that have continued to stay with us for one reason or another in just a second. But first, Jodi.
Are you interested in hearing some very funny, heartwarming stories that my sister and I can share about my dad, or would you rather not?
No, this is the Anne and Jodi and Marc show. So whatever form this takes will be what you bring to it.
Okay, well, I will tell you about a story that I wanted to share that was very funny and very typical of my dad. I don't know, my mother doesn't know if it's true. I don't know if my sister knows it's true, but I lost a pet rat when we were out at the lake. My dad was back in LA doing business, and I couldn't find a pet store that had rats because we raised pet rats. We had quite a menagerie of animals. And he brought back a new baby rat for me on the plane in a little tiny cage. And somehow the rat got loose on the plane. He leaned down by where his feet were, and the rat was gone. He didn't know what to do. I mean, having this rat with a long, skinny tail running down the aisles, he just couldn't comprehend it. And he got down on his hands and knees, pretending like he had lost his glasses or something, saying, "Did anybody see my glasses?" And then he, had to go back to his seat, and he leaned down and the rat crawled back into the cage. But he would tell this story and he just would laugh, belly laugh about it and tell everybody. I don't really know for sure if it was true, but he did bring me back a pet rat. So those were 2 fun stories that I remember.
Yeah. And do you have a memory that you'd like to share?
There's a writer, Roger Rosenblatt, who wrote an essay for his daughter when she was graduating. And in the essay, he wished her, all the normal things, that she would always have her love of reading and her love of animals and her love of books, and always loved to travel. And he then said he wished her moments of helpless hilarity. And this really struck me because when I think about my dad, I think about all of those moments of helpless hilarity that I had with him. One example is I was getting my room redecorated when I was about 13, and I was getting a new carpet, new wallpaper, and I couldn't wait to get home from school to see this. And I walked in, and my father came in with me, and in the corner of the room, one of the dogs had gone to the bathroom. And I pointed to it, and my father walked over and picked it up in his hands. And I realized it was one of those gag dog things you get. But it became a running joke between us. I would hide it in his office and then he would hide it on me. And the other thing is, whenever we get into an elevator together, he would tell me a joke right before the doors open. And then I would start to laugh, and then he would start to laugh, and we would giggle like two crazy people. And then sometimes when I was older, he would teach me off-colored limerick. And every off-colored limerick I learned from my dad, and he'd tell me that just as we got on the elevator. The elevator would be silent except for us giggling away. So,
and the fun thing is, even though the vast majority of the Twilight Zones and Night Gallery and many of the 90-minute plays that he wrote during the era of live television, even though much of the subject matter was serious, even in the wraparounds he would do at the front of Twilight Zone and Night Gallery, we would see glimpses of Rod's sense of humor.
Yes.
So, he wasn't this totally serious guy. He was, he would show us viewers glimpses of the Rod that you guys both knew growing up. And even though at least some of the lessons on the Twilight Zone could be very moral, he was also very sentimental, and we saw that a lot, throughout the Twilight Zone.
Yeah, he Rod had a great self-deprecating sense of humor. He would tell stories on himself. There was a great story he told where he'd been writing for local television in Ohio, and then he sold to a national show. And for the first time, he was going to New York to meet with the producer and everyone, everyone working on the show. And it was his first meeting, and he went there in a suit, and he had a briefcase. And the meeting went very, very well. And then he said goodbye to everyone, and he turned and he walked right into the wall. And his briefcase fell open, and his underwear and his socks spilled out. And so he couldn't even look at anyone, just kind of gathered everything together and like stumbled blindly out in the corridor, wondering how he could ever face these people again. And the producer came out, and he put his arm around Rod, and he said, "Look, all they care about is what you've got up here," And that was a great lesson. And but the wonderful thing about Rod, I think, that really comes across is his authenticity. The reason we love him, beyond the fact that we love Twilight Zone, we love Rod. And it's because you get a sense that he'd be just a great guy to sit down with and talk to. Burgess Meredith, when I interviewed him about Rod, he said, like many good writers, he listened more than he talked. And I think that's very telling. He didn't suck all the oxygen out of the room. He didn't need that. He knew who he was and what he was, and he had, he would be self-deprecating, but he also knew that he was really the real deal.
When he was teaching, he said that he learned more from the students than they learned from him.
Yeah.
So he definitely believed in the younger generation. They're the future. And I think he definitely, turned to them. They absolutely adored him. I'm friends with some of his old students. But he cared and was genuine, and the students knew it. He wasn't just a typical teacher. He was there to learn from them, and they were to learn from him. And it was just, it was incredible.
Well, what was very telling is that I came across videotapes and audio tapes of him teaching. These were recordings where they were never going to be broadcast, so he could be absolutely candid. And one thing that really struck me was he knew the names of all of the students. He would address them by name. He put in the effort. Everyone knew that he was Rod Serling. He actually put in, and this is so rare, that he would actually go to the trouble of knowing everyone's name and address them by name when they would ask a question. He came to them with respect. So he wasn't the huge Hollywood star, dispensing, wisdom to the great unwashed. He had respect for people, and you can tell even in his writing, because the people he writes about aren't billionaires. They're not usually, unless they're bad guys, but they're bank tellers and sales girls and regular folks, people raising their families. That's where his heart was. That was where his affinity lay. So yeah,
we're with Anne Serling and Jodi Serling, the daughters of Rod Serling. Anne Serling, author of As I Knew Him, My Dad, Rod Serling, celebrating the 100th anniversary of the birth of Rod Serling, along with Marc Scott Zicree. Marc Scott Zicree, author of the Twilight Zone Companion, both As I Knew Him, My Dad, Rod Serling, and The Twilight Zone Companion, available wherever books are sold, as well as Amazon.com. Stay with us, folks. We'll be right back. This portion of TV Confidential is brought to you by Salt River Therapy, a compassionate, confidential boutique therapy practice that offers quality therapies for individuals and couples, both in person in Brooklyn, New York, and virtually throughout New York State and New Jersey. Their specialties include anxiety, grief, low self-esteem, identity issues, and relationship challenges, while the mission of Salt River Therapy is to help you find your inner capacity for vulnerability, healing, and growth so that you can really understand yourself and your experiences, prioritize caring for yourself, and finally tackle the things that have been bothering you. The people at Salt River Therapy value being therapists who actually get you. They love connecting with clients who may be worried about being misunderstood or judged, or who might be afraid of change, or who aren't quite sure what's not working in their lives, but are hoping to find clarity, build resilience, and figure out their way forward. Salt River Therapy accepts most New York Aetna plans and have sliding scale rates available. To learn more about what they do or to schedule a free phone consultation, visit saltrivertherapy.com, saltrivertherapy.com.
This is Jack Klugman, and you're listening to TV Confidential.
One of my favorite episodes, this is an episode I had seen many times before I watched the entire 156 last year, is Changing of the Guard, the one about the teacher played by Donald Pleasence. And
yeah.
It's a wonderful story for a lot of reasons, but one of the most haunting lines is when Donald Pleasence's character wonders whether, he looks back at his career as a teacher and he wondered whether he made any impression at all.
Yes.
Well, and one of my dad's last interviews with Linda Burvell, she asked him, how do you want to be remembered? And this definitely was similar to the Changing of the Guard. And he said, as long as I'm known as a writer, that's sufficient honor to me. And little did he know what kind of magnitude and tremendous audience, he just keeps going and going and going. It's just, he had premonitions of what was to be. And he's always out there. And I just think he'd be totally flabbergasted of the legacy that he has left and continues to leave, for sure.
The episode that you're talking about, Ed, is he had a very close relationship, by the way, with his teacher in Binghamton, who really saw his potential even when he was the class clown. But it is a poignant, beautiful episode that I actually novelized, which was difficult, but his writing was so beautiful.
Yeah.
But when these students come back and they tell him, I learned about courage and I learned about honor and I learned about honesty and strength. It's just so moving.
Yeah. Well, also one of the fun things that Rod's doing in Twilight Zone, he wrote 92 of the 156 episodes himself. Mm-hmm. That's a huge output. And he was writing movies and he was doing the short story collections and all that stuff, a phenomenal output. And but he was also playing riffs on mainstream stories. So, for instance, Changing the Guard is sort of a Twilight Zone take on Goodbye, Mr. Chips, or 16 Millimeter Shrine with Ida Lupino is sort of a riff on Sunset Boulevard. And so it's really fun because he's making these stories unique and his own, but processing all. And so he'll do 1 week on Twilight. See, the lovely thing about Twilight Zone is any week it could be anything.
That's right.
So a Western or a war story or a love story or or something about automation. He had such freedom to tell the stories he wanted to tell after being so censored when he was trying to write mainstream shows like Playhouse 90. I mean, if Rod had just decided to capitulate and write stories that were about human beings but didn't say anything about race or politics or the issues of the day, then he could have gone on to, he could have written, and gone on to write for the High Chaparral or Gunsmoke or something, or abandon the medium like Paddy Chayefsky did. Yeah. Paddy Chayefsky just threw up his hands and said, I can't work in this medium anymore. But Rod came up with that brilliant idea of, if I do science fiction and fantasy and horror, I can get past the censors. They won't see what I'm up to. And that worked enormously well. And So Rod had finally had the control that he longed for ever since he started as a writer. So that was thank God for that.
And
And
even
he's
an
a
episode like The Bard, it's an hour long episode, but it's also one of my favorites because it's one of those shows as I've gotten older and I've gotten an opportunity to learn more about the history of television and talk to people,
Yes.
such as all of you, and learn and all of that. It's very funny, and it's the best kind of satire because the best kind of satire is when it's based in truth and reality, and he punctures all of the things about network think that he dealt with 60
Yes.
years ago and which people still deal with today.
And for those who don't know what that episode is, it's one of the hour episodes, and it's one of Serling's rare comedies. It's very, very funny, and it has Jack Weston, who actually is very dramatic in Monsters Who Dawn Maple Street. He's great in that episode, but here he is in a comedy turn as a hack TV writer who summons up Shakespeare, the ghost of Shakespeare, to help him write scripts. And I remember one of Rod's jokes was that he has Jack Weston misremember the name of the Pulitzer Prize, and he refers to it as the Wurlitzer Prize. So it's a fun script. It's very, very fun. And but again, Rod had access to such wonderful actors. So week after week, these were, it was almost like he was playing a tennis game with sort of the top pros in tennis, and it was just this wonderful, give and take. Really fun. Really fun.
When I had a chance to talk to Jack Klugman, just to pick a name, I mean, and when I asked him, tell us what it was like to perform the words of Rod Serling. It was over the phone, but I can see he sat up straight and he lit up. He was really excited, and he remembered. In fact, I forget which one, but he said that Rod had written a script for him, and Jack was performing in Gypsy at the time, and he couldn't do it. And Rod said, "I'll save it for you."
Wow, that's great. That's great. And that's wisdom. That's wisdom. And that's where being the top at the top of the food chain on a show is so invaluable, because you can do things like that. You can push that script. Whereas if he was just like a toiler in the fields, the network or the executives would have said, "Nah, we can't bump this. You're just going to have to get, whatever second-rate actor is Jack Klugman when you can't get Jack Klugman." But Rod really believed in it. And of course, the episodes that Jack Klugman did, I mean, In Praise of Pip is such a phenomenal episode. And I remember in your memoir, and you write about how that was so much derived from your relationship with your dad. And it's a heartbreaking episode. It's wonderful.
And so beautifully acted by both Jack Klugman and Bill Mumy, too.
Yes.
We're with Anne Serling and Jodi Serling, the daughters of Rod Serling. Anne Serling, author of As I Knew Him, My Dad, Rod Serling, celebrating the 100th anniversary of the birth of Rod Serling, along with Marc Scott Zicree. Marc Scott Zicree, author of the Twilight Zone Companion. Anne, Jodi, and Marc will stay with us for one more segment. We hope you'll stay with us as we continue to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the birth of Rod Serling when we come back on TV Confidential.